When the fog rolls in, something ancient awakens. Footprints over 2 feet long, eerie thuds in the dark, and rearranged campsites all point to something deliberate, something watching. From campers rattled in their trailers during an Alaskan snowstorm, to a lone trucker confronting a colossal shadow on a fog-covered Carpathian road, these encounters reveal an intelligence moving through wilderness unseen. In this video, we'll uncover 6 terrifying encounters with a towering presence that vanishes into the world's coldest frontiers. On March 28, 2025, a heavy snowstorm swept across interior Alaska, covering miles of wilderness in thick white fog. Deep inside that frozen stillness sat a lonely campground surrounded by tall spruce trees bending under the weight of the wind. Inside the small trailers and campers, guests tried to sleep through the howling gusts, unaware that something far larger than the storm was moving beyond the tree line. As the night grew colder, the sound of the storm changed. The wind began to vibrate against metal, followed by sudden jolts that shook the parked vehicle. One by one, the trailers rocked from side to side as if lifted and dropped by unseen hands. Frosted windows trembled, and thin layers of ice cracked under the strain. Inside his vehicle, Mark Lawson sat up sharply, the noise unlike anything caused by the weather. The violent swaying threw objects from shelves and sent his dog Rusty barking until a deep thud silenced every sound. Through the thin layer of frost, Mark saw movement. A large shadow passed close to the glass, followed by a single huge hand pressing against the window. The shape was covered in coarse fur, fingers thicker than branches, the outline so large it filled nearly half the pane before sliding away into the fog. The surface of the glass held a smudge of frost melted by warmth, then nothing but white mist beyond. Outside, the storm muffled everything except for heavy steps that thudded across the icy ground. The motion rippled through the packed snow like distant drumbeats. Other campers later recalled their trailers creaking as if something massive brushed against them, testing each wall before moving on. The growls that followed came from no animal they could name, low, guttural, vibrating through the metal frames of every parked unit. By morning, silence returned. Snow blanketed the campground in pale stillness, yet traces of the night remained. Mark found the leash still hanging beside the door, its clasp open, but Rusty was gone. There were no paw marks in the powder, only deep, bare impressions forming a path through the lot. Each mark measured more than 2 feet from heel to toe and sank deep into the frozen surface. Near the edge of the site, food containers belonging to Mark and his friends Lisa and Carl were found emptied. What unsettled everyone most was how the items had been arranged. The coolers stood in tidy rows, pointing toward the forest like silent arrows. Around them, broken spruces leaned outward, snapped several feet above human reach. The air carried a harsh smell that clung to clothes and skin, a sharp mixture of musk and something metallic. Authorities arrived soon after, marking the event as damage caused by the storm. Yet those who had been awake during the shaking knew the truth was stranger. Beneath the frozen morning light, the tracks, the order, and the missing dog told of a presence that moved with purpose, touched with intelligence, and vanished as quietly as it had come. The news of the strange night spread fast among nearby villages, though most dismissed it as weather damage and panic caused by the blizzard. Yet those who had been there could not rest. The snow had buried most of the prints by midday, but the few photographs taken showed a level of detail no animal could make. The shape of the toes and the width of the steps spoke of something that walked upright with purpose. Every line around the impressions carried the weight of intelligence, not chance. Officials returned later in the week to record statements, their boots sinking into new snow that had already softened the evidence. They collected samples of fur found near the broken spruces, though nothing came of it afterward. The reports written for public record mentioned strong winds, falling trees, and frightened campers misjudging natural sounds. The musky odor, the missing pet, and the stacked containers never appeared in the final summary. Mark stayed at the site long enough to help clear the damaged trailers. He avoided looking at the forest, though his eyes drifted toward it often. The silence from that direction felt heavier than the snow itself. Every sound, every crunch beneath his boots, made him glance over his shoulder. Lisa and Carl left the same day, unable to bear the stillness that surrounded the campground once the vehicles were gone. None of them returned again. In the weeks that followed, hunters claimed to hear strange noises in that area. Some described heavy footfalls echoing through the valley at night. Others said they found saplings bent into arches along the trails, as though something huge had marked its route. One man even swore that his snowmobile had been moved while he rested, left standing upright against a pine with no tracks leading to it. The rangers who patrolled the region avoided staying out after dark. They said the wind changed direction near the park, moving in circles rather than flowing through. They found more trees snapped high above the ground, always fresh, always pointing toward the same patch of deep woods. The animal experts who came later could not explain the uniformity of the damage or the absence of debris around the broken trunks. When spring arrived, the frozen ground thawed, revealing strange depressions near the old RV plots. They formed long arcs in the soil, each the same size, leading straight toward the forest. The shapes faded after a few days, but the memory of them stayed with those who had seen them. By summer, the campground was empty. No new guests arrived, and the owners closed it quietly without notice. Locals still passed that road at a distance, watching the tree line where the fog seems to linger longer than anywhere else. Some say a faint smell still drifts through the air after storms sharp and bitter. The place remains untouched, waiting in silence, as if whatever came that night had only paused its path, patient, unseen, and never far away. On November 14, 2013, hunter Eric Sandberg traveled alone into the cold expanse of the Alaska Range, chasing the tracks of caribou that moved across the early snow. The sky hung low and gray, the air sharp enough to freeze breath into mist. His snowmobile carried him miles beyond marked routes, deep into a valley surrounded by steep ridges and thick spruce. He built a small camp near a frozen ravine, planning to return home after 2 nights of hunting. No one knew that he would never make it back. During the third evening, heavy clouds gathered, covering the mountains in silence. A faint sound rolled through the forest, a low, dragging thud, and branches snapped in the distance. The stillness felt unnatural, as if the whole valley waited. Eric stood near the tree line, his rifle resting by his side, watching the snow drift in long, pale ribbons. Something large was moving just beyond the fog, hidden by the heavy fall of flakes. The crunch of steps echoed slowly, far apart, like the weight of something enormous shifting its path. He turned toward his snowmobile, its faint headlights shining weakly across the frost. A second noise followed, a deep vibration in the ground, then a sudden crack that made the nearest trees shiver. Snow slid from their branches, and shapes seemed to twist in the whiteness. The air thickened with the sound of heavy breathing. Before Eric could lift his weapon, the silence shattered. The snow erupted beside him. A massive blur surged forward with impossible speed. The sound was not a roar, but a low, grinding growl that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. Eric stumbled backward, striking the edge of a spruce. His rifle fell into the snow as something hit him hard, forcing him off his feet. The blow sent him tumbling against the tree trunk, the impact bending it halfway before it cracked and fell. A heavy weight pressed the air flat, then everything stilled again. No voice, no motion, only the hiss of wind sliding through the broken branches. By morning, a search party began looking after he failed to return. They followed the faint line of his trail until it ended at the frozen ravine. His snowmobile stood abandoned, engine cold, untouched. A few yards beyond lay the fallen spruce, half buried in drifted snow. Beneath it they found him, twisted and broken, his limbs bent at unnatural angles as though lifted and dropped with great force. Around the clearing, barefoot prints as long as an arm circled the scene, pressing deep into the crusted snow before vanishing into the forest's edge. The rescuers said little. The air there felt wrong, thick with dread. Saplings nearby were snapped high above any person's reach. The snow looked disturbed in odd shapes, as if something huge had crouched there. It was clear that Eric had not died by accident. Something had found him before the storm. The search crew wrapped the site quickly before the storm worsened. The cold deepened, sealing the valley in silence again. The prints near the fallen spruce faded as more snow drifted across them, but those who had seen them could not forget their size. Each step seemed to press the ground in a pattern too deliberate to belong to an animal. The rescuers photographed everything but left uneasy, their eyes often turning to the dark forest where the tracks disappeared. The wind carried faint groans through the trees, long and hollow, as if something vast moved beyond sight. When the remains reached town, the doctors listed the cause as blunt trauma mixed with exposure. No one questioned how a body could bend that way, or how the wound seemed too clean for an accident. The rifle was tested and found unused. Nothing else was missing. The official story marked it as a fall during bad weather. The file closed quietly, but the people who had gone there did not stop speaking of it. They told of how the air seemed heavy and how every sound felt muffled, as though the mountain itself listened. In the weeks that followed, snow buried the area completely, but others began to talk. A couple staying in a cabin miles away told of hearing strange noises the night the hunter vanished. The sounds were low, deep, and rhythmic, like breathing carried through the wind. Later, they heard cracking wood and a dragging noise that went on for several minutes before stopping suddenly. By dawn, everything was still. They did not leave their cabin until daylight. When they later learned of the death, the memory of that sound returned with new meaning. Rangers tried to reach the valley again in spring, but the melt had washed away all traces. The place felt untouched, yet watched. Trees stood unnaturally bent in some areas. The ground flattened in smooth curves as if something large had rested there. They marked the spot as restricted, warning travelers to stay on higher paths. No explanation was given, only the quiet note that conditions were unsafe. Those who read the report understood that something unseen remained. Years passed, and the story turned into a local whisper. Some said a creature had guarded the mountains long before people arrived, keeping away intruders. Others believed something ancient lived beneath the snow, moving only during storms when it could hide its shape. Hunters avoided the deeper trails, leaving offerings of food or small tools near the tree line. None of them returned to that ravine. For the family, the loss stayed without closure. They buried what was found and left Alaska soon after. The land felt too wide, too filled with silence that pressed from all sides. And even as new winters came and went, those who worked near the range swore that on quiet nights a slow groan rolled down from the peaks, fading before it reached the valley, like a memory of movement too large to be forgotten. On December 11, 2020, a small group of hunters set up camp beside a wide frozen river deep in the Yukon wilderness. The night was calm, the cold air thick enough to sting their skin. Their tent stood near the edge of the woods, close to where the ice cracked faintly beneath layers of snow. They cooked their evening meal and stored the day's catch, fish and game neatly packed in a small pile near the fire pit. The forest around them was silent, holding only the faint hum of wind moving through frozen branches. As darkness settled, fog crept low along the riverbank, swallowing their tracks. The temperature dropped sharply, and the air grew heavy. Hours later, when the campfire had burned down to faint embers, the stillness broke. A sudden, deep strike hit the side of one tent with a noise so heavy it echoed through the valley. Another followed, harder, shaking the ground. The men froze where they sat, hearts pounding, unsure if it was wind, ice, or something worse. The pounding grew louder, rhythmic, as if something enormous pressed fists or arms against the thin walls. The fabric rippled and cracked under the force, snow falling from the roof of each shelter. They dared not move. Every strike came slower than the last, deliberate, almost testing. Between each thud there was silence, broken only by faint vibrations running beneath the frozen ground. Outside, something shifted near the edge of the trees. The hunters could hear weight shifting across the ice, followed by low, heavy breaths that carried through the darkness. Each breath sounded deep and rough, unlike any known animal. The smell in the air turned sharp and bitter, filling their lungs with an unpleasant, burning taste. Time lost meaning as the night stretched on. At one point, the sound changed, a scraping drag across the snow, followed by the soft crunch of footsteps moving away from the camp. They stayed still until dawn light crept through the cracks of their tents, afraid to step outside. When they finally emerged, the scene around them told a story of order mixed with chaos. One tent was half collapsed, its poles bent but not broken. The fishing gear and weapons had been scattered but placed neatly into lines pointing toward the forest beyond the river. The food they had caught the previous day was gone, not dragged off but stacked cleanly near the tree line, as if someone had taken time to arrange it before leaving. The strangest discovery lay in the snow. Deep imprints shaped like bare human feet stretched in wide circles around the camp, each print measuring over 2 feet long. The steps led from the clearing toward the woods, then stopped abruptly at the first line of trees. Nearby, saplings were broken high above normal reach, snapped clean and bent backward. The hunters stared at the tracks in silence, realizing something massive had come for them, and chosen to leave. The hunters packed in silence, their faces pale under the weak winter sun. Each movement felt slow and heavy, their nerves raw from the night before. The air remained thick with that strange, sour scent that clung to their clothes and gear. Even as daylight spread across the frozen valley, the sense of being watched refused to fade. They gathered what remained and left the camp, dragging sleds behind them over the cracked ice, eager to reach the tree line before dusk returned. As they traveled, the forest seemed to close around them. The stillness pressed in from every side. No birds called and no small animals moved through the snow. Only the creak of their boots and the moan of shifting ice followed them down the river path. Once or twice, the wind carried faint, deep tones that seemed almost like breathing, fading each time they turned to listen. When they reached the nearest outpost, they reported the event with shaking hands and uneven words. Rangers sent a small crew back to examine the site. What they found mirrored the hunter's story in unsettling detail. The snow was disturbed only in certain places, as though great weight had pressed down in specific spots. The lines of gear remained perfectly straight, pointing once more toward the woods. Near the far edge of the clearing, 2 slender trees were bent together into a high arch, their bark stripped and smooth, standing like a mark or signal. Investigators searched for animal prints, human traces, or signs of weather damage. None matched the evidence. The prints were far too large for any known creature, and the spacing suggested something that moved with balance and intent. Measurements showed no dragging or slippage, as if the shape had appeared and vanished without transition. The tent fabric bore dents from blunt force, but no claw tears or bite marks. Whatever had struck them had done so with strength but restraint, leaving proof of its power yet sparing their lives. Local officials blamed strong winds and ice shifting under the camp. The explanation satisfied none of the witnesses. People who had lived their whole lives in the Yukon knew the difference between wind and deliberate force. Rumors spread through nearby towns of an ancient creature that wandered the valleys during deep winter, traveling between frozen rivers when the air was quiet enough to hide its movement. Weeks later, trappers passing through the same area found new signs. Small mounds of snow formed straight paths toward the forest, beneath which lay neatly arranged stones, each one placed equidistant from the next. The scent of metal and musk hung faintly on the breeze. The hunters never returned to the region. Some stopped working in the north altogether, uneasy in places where fog touched the ground. The memory followed them long after, the echo of blows against fabric, the trembling earth beneath the ice, and the feeling that something vast, cold, and intelligent had measured their fear and spared them only to remind them of its reach. On June 9, 2018, the early air above the Rocky Mountains was thick with a gray mist that rolled through deep ravines and pine-covered slopes. Jason Hale, an experienced helicopter pilot, was assigned to scan a remote valley for signs of missing hikers who had vanished a week earlier. The fog was heavy, curling around the treetops like smoke, and visibility was reduced to only a few yards ahead. Jason guided the aircraft slowly, its rotors cutting through the still air while the mountains below disappeared and reappeared like shifting shadows. Below, the The forest floor looked scarred and strange. Broken branches marked unnatural paths across the undergrowth. His attention fixed on a clearing where patches of wet snow still clung to the ground. As he descended slightly, a sudden shape caught his eye. Massive, upright and broad, unlike anything human. The figure stood motionless near the edge of the glade, towering above the brush. For a moment the fog parted, and he could see that something dangled from its arm, limp and pale, roughly the size and form of a person. The outline blurred again as the mist closed in, swallowing everything. Jason circled lower, trying to follow the shadow that had vanished into the dense trees. He caught glimpses of movement, branches swaying, heavy thuds against the soil, and snow lifting slightly as if by unseen weight. The fog distorted all sound, yet faint guttural vibrations rose through the air, deep and uneven, echoing through the valley walls. His hands tightened on the controls as the aircraft wavered in the shifting wind. Hovering closer, he noticed below a disturbing pattern pressed into the snow and mud. Enormous barefoot impressions, more than 2 feet long, trailed from the clearing toward the dark woods, twisting as though circling before disappearing beneath the canopy. Near the center of the clearing lay scattered gear, shredded fabric, a boot, and something metallic glinting faintly among the brush. From above, the ground looked disturbed in loops and ridges, as if something huge had dragged or turned over the soil with deliberate care. A sharp gust lifted a sheet of fog from the surface for an instant, revealing splintered saplings bent backward, snapped at angles too clean for any storm. A few were wedged into the ground in a pattern, almost aligned. Jason felt a chill climb up his neck as the air carried a dense, musky odor that cut through the smell of engine fuel, thick, bitter, and wild. He steadied the aircraft and turned it upward, the clouds closing beneath him once more. He completed the flight path in silence, unable to shake the image of that immense, moving shadow. Nothing else stirred in the fog-drenched valley. The footprints, the broken trees, the scattered belongings, and the strange, heavy scent told a story without words. A story of something colossal, deliberate, and unseen that had claimed what it wanted and retreated into the endless forest, leaving only traces of power and fear behind. Jason Hale landed the helicopter hours later, but the unease from what he had seen clung to him like the fog itself. When he reported the sighting, his account was met with quiet disbelief. Officials took notes, asked for coordinates, and sent a small ground team to the area. The team returned 2 days later, pale and tight-lipped, speaking only of poor visibility and dangerous terrain. They claimed no trace of missing hikers or strange shapes had been found, though their vehicles smelled faintly of the same musky odor Jason had noticed in the air above the valley. The search widened in the following days, with rangers, drones, and dogs combing the mountain slopes. The canines refused to approach certain points, whimpering and pulling at their leashes. Where they hesitated, the snow seemed packed in strange curves, forming shallow depressions too wide to be human. Trees along the ravine carried deep grooves that rose well above head height, as if something large had dragged a heavy object past them. In one area, searchers discovered a pile of smooth stones, each stacked with precision, and a torn strap from a backpack resting neatly on top. As days passed, the weather shifted, washing away most of the visible signs. The footprints filled with melting snow and the broken branches dried in the sun, blending again into the wilderness. Official reports concluded that the hikers had likely succumbed to exposure or injury after getting lost in the fog. No mention was made of towering shapes, circular tracks, or scattered human belongings. For Jason, the explanation offered no comfort. His mind replayed the moment in the mist when he had seen that silhouette, tall and heavy, its movements measured and calm. The limp figure it carried returned in his dreams, sometimes closer, sometimes fading, but never gone. Weeks later, a new team visited the same region for environmental mapping. They noted strange patterns in the forest floor, where the soil seemed unnaturally smooth, pressed in wide arcs as though shaped by deliberate motion. Moss had grown back, but beneath it the ground was firm, almost hardened. Wildlife appeared scarce, and the usual bird calls were absent. The air still carried a faint, bitter scent that lingered even against the wind. Jason stopped flying low routes over the valley. He altered his flight paths, keeping his distance, though the valley remained visible in the far distance, a silent scar on the mountainside. Locals began calling it the Quiet Hollow, a place where echoes never returned and where sound seemed to vanish mid-air. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed the earth there breathed differently, alive and aware. Months later, hikers again passed near the area and found fragments of a tent embedded in ice at the edge of a slope. The material was torn cleanly, the fabric's ends scorched as if pressed by immense heat. Beneath the ice, faint impressions remained, wide, elongated, and symmetrical, disappearing toward the tree line. The case stayed closed, but those who had gone there knew the truth lingered just beyond sight. The misty valley kept its secret, patient and quiet, holding within it the memory of something vast and intelligent that had once walked its floor and watched from behind the fog. On January 15, 2014, 4 campers entered the frozen wilderness of the Russian taiga. The group included Ivan, Lena, Oleg, and Daria, all experienced in winter travel and eager for a peaceful weekend in the quiet woods. The land was endless white, the trees tall and heavy with ice. They set their tents beside a frozen river, unaware that the calm sky would soon vanish behind a wall of snow and wind. As night fell, a strange sound rolled through the pines, deep and uneven, like a growl carried by the storm. The wind began to twist around the camp, turning the air thick with frost. Visibility dropped to nothing. The 4 huddled close to the fire, but the flames bent sideways and sputtered. Moments later, the full force of the blizzard struck. Snow whirled so fast it became a solid wall of white. The campers' voices disappeared under the roar. Through the chaos, Lena saw something dark move between the trees. It was taller than any man and as wide as 2 standing side by side. The form bent and straightened, vanishing again into the storm. Fear spread through the group, but there was nowhere to run. They tried to hold the tent poles, yet the structure shook with violent force. The ropes snapped and the canvas folded as if crushed by unseen hands. Ivan shouted for them to move, and the group scattered in the storm. The cold bit through their coats, and the wind seemed alive, pushing them apart. Oleg fell near the broken firewood pile, noticing shapes around him. Branches that looked freshly snapped far above ground. Logs toppled in patterns too neat to be random. He felt something heavy pass near him, unseen but close enough to press the air from his lungs. Daria stumbled through knee-deep snow, the whiteout wrapping around her. A low vibration rippled through the ground beneath her boots. Somewhere ahead, the sound of heavy steps echoed, slow and steady. She turned, but there was only snow and fog. The noise stopped as quickly as it began. By dawn, the storm eased. Silence settled, heavy and endless. 2 of the campers, Oleg and Daria, were gone. Ivan and Lena wandered near the frozen river, faces pale, clothes torn, minds blank with fear. Their eyes were hollow, their words broken, like echoes of something they could no longer describe. Around the camp, deep barefoot marks pressed into the snow in a circle, each longer than a man's arm. No animal or boot could make such prints. The sky cleared into pale blue, but the land felt wrong, as if something unseen still watched from the forest's edge. The wind carried faint guttural tones, fading slowly into the cold air. Ivan and Lena shivered, unable to remember what had happened after the storm began, only that the snow had moved, and something within it had followed them all night. The frozen morning dragged forward in slow silence. Ivan and Lena wandered without direction, faces pale from cold and shock. Searchers spotted them near the edge of the river, moving slowly through the deep snow, their steps uneven. When the rescuers reached them, both stood staring at nothing, hands trembling. They were carried back to the village, weak and confused, barely able to recall their own names. Rescue teams followed their tracks toward the old campsite. The storm had erased most signs, but what remained froze the men in their place. Around the broken tents, the snow had been pressed flat in perfect curves, as if something heavy had moved in circles around the camp. No footprints matched human boots. The marks were large, with clear toe shapes, spaced far apart as if made by something tall with a long stride. Equipment lay scattered but not thrown. Cooking pots, wood pieces, and clothes had been positioned in strange, straight lines, too neat for accident. One of the tents leaned against a bent tree, its surface marked by deep scratches that climbed higher than any person could reach. The wind had stopped, yet the forest remained eerily still, as though listening. A faint smell hung in the cold, sharp and sour, mixing with the clean scent of snow. Farther into the trees, searchers found signs of struggle. Branches were split, and logs half buried in drifts formed odd patterns, almost geometric, yet there were no traces of Oleg or Daria. The footprints that led away ended suddenly near the densest part of the forest, stopping in mid-step. The snow there was untouched beyond that point, as if whatever had made those tracks had vanished into the air. Authorities reported that a snowstorm had caused panic, disorientation, and frost injury. The missing campers were declared victims of exposure. However, several rescuers refused to return to that region again. They spoke quietly among themselves of whispers that rose with the wind and of strange thudding sounds that seemed to echo from beneath the ground. Ivan and Lena recovered slowly, though their minds remained clouded. They avoided the outdoors and flinched at the sound of howling wind. When asked what they had seen, they struggled for words, producing only low, broken murmurs that mirrored the strange growls once carried through the storm. Doctors called it trauma from cold and fear, but the rhythm of those sounds matched the deep vibrations the rescue party had felt in the forest. Weeks passed, and new snow buried the old camp. Hunters later claimed that tall impressions reappeared in the same clearing, each fresh and sharp as though recently pressed. No one went to confirm it. The taiga remained untouched, its white stillness covering secrets beneath layers of ice. Locals warned travelers to avoid camping there when snow thickened, saying the storm did not move alone. Something unseen walked with it, circling, waiting, and marking the living with silence before swallowing them whole. On October 17, 2024, truck driver Marek Novak guided his heavy rig through a lonely mountain road winding deep inside the Carpathians. The night air was thick and still, wrapped in fog so dense that even the truck's headlights faded into white walls of mist. The road curved sharply between dark pine slopes, and only the low hum of the engine broke the silence. The fog pressed close, turning the world into a tunnel of gray. As the rig climbed higher, a sudden impact shook the entire cabin. Metal groaned under the violent force, and the wheel jerked in his hands. The vehicle skidded slightly before he managed to stop along the narrow shoulder. Heart pounding, he looked ahead, but nothing appeared on the road. There was no fallen branch, no animal, no wreck, only mist swirling thickly around the beams of his headlights. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and iron. He stepped out cautiously, boots crunching on gravel. The ground near the front bumper showed no sign of debris, yet the air trembled with an odd vibration, faint but steady, as though something large moved unseen in the fog. He checked the tires, the grill, the road surface. Nothing broken, no stains, no fur. Everything appeared normal, but the feeling that something was close refused to fade. Unable to see beyond a few meters, he climbed back into the cab and locked the doors. The interior felt small, the air heavy. Hours passed slowly. He leaned back in his seat, eyes half closed, when the first sound came, a dull, hollow thud from the side of the trailer. Then another, louder, shaking the mirrors. The truck trembled with each impact, the steel panels creaking under tremendous weight. The noise moved along the roof, slow and deliberate, like footsteps too heavy for any human. He stayed frozen, listening as guttural thumps echoed through the valley, rolling and uneven, rising and fading with the wind. At one point, the entire vehicle jolted sideways as if struck by a giant hand. His breath quickened. Through the steamed glass, a shadow brushed against the window. For an instant, he saw it clearly in the faint reflection of his running lights. A huge, rough arm covered in coarse, dark hair. fingers as thick as branches curling along the edge of the window frame. Then it was gone, swallowed by the fog. The pounding stopped suddenly, replaced by deep stillness. The only sound left was the slow ticking of the cooling engine. He waited motionless until the first pale light of morning crept through the trees. When he finally stepped outside, the earth around the rig bore deep impressions shaped like enormous human feet, each more than 2 feet long. The soil was torn where they began and smooth where they ended, leading straight toward the dense forest. A bitter, sharp odor filled the air, mixed with the faint scent of sap and damp moss. Broken branches leaned inward as if something enormous had forced its way through. Merrick stood alone beside the silent truck, shaken to his core, certain that whatever had followed him through the fog was still somewhere beyond the trees, watching. Merrick climbed back into the truck and drove through the twisting road in silence. His hands shook on the steering wheel, and every noise from the tires sounded wrong. The forest around him seemed alive with movement he could not see. When he reached the small village at the base of the pass, his nerves were raw, and exhaustion weighed on him like stone. He parked near a diner and sat for hours, staring at nothing, unable to rest. The strange odor from the mountain air still clung to his clothes, sharp and heavy. Later that day, he reported what had happened to the local officers. They followed him to the site, their boots sinking into the mud where the deep shapes remained. The marks were wide and long, pressed too deep for any man. Broken twigs and bent saplings pointed toward the same path that vanished into the woods. The men took photographs but soon lost interest, calling it the mark of an animal dragged by melting snow. No one could explain the neat rows of crushed soil around the truck or the missing sections of bark scraped in high arcs along the trees. That night, Merrick stayed at a roadside inn, unable to sleep. The sounds of the wind tapping against the glass made his stomach twist. Each noise reminded him of the pounding from the previous night. He kept seeing that massive arm sliding against the window, its size impossible, its skin dark with coarse hair that glistened in the faint light. When morning came, he could not bring himself to drive through that mountain pass again. He chose a longer route, adding hours to his journey. Anything to avoid the road where the fog had swallowed him whole. Word spread through nearby towns about the strange incident. Some mocked, others whispered of the legends that had lingered for generations. Old hunters spoke quietly of things that walked the Carpathian forests, unseen and patient, stronger than any bear. They said these beings observed those who entered their territory, testing them, never killing unless provoked. Marek listened once but refused to return to the subject again. He sold the truck weeks later and found work closer to the city. Winter settled over the mountains soon after. Travelers who took that same route began to report the same smell along the roadside, strong, bitter, like smoke and rot together. A few mentioned distant sounds at night, heavy and deliberate, echoing across the slopes. One driver claimed his trailer had been shifted sideways in the fog, though no other vehicle passed. None of them stayed to search for a cause. Years later, the old road remained mostly empty, avoided by most locals. Some said it was cursed. Others said something ancient lived among those peaks. Merrick never returned, but he often woke in the dark, certain he could still hear the dull, steady thuds that had followed him through that endless night in the fog.